morning. I'm Rowena Crosby.
And I'm Deborah Rinner, and we're your co-hosts for this show. Thank you for joining us for the next 17 minutes for your Invisible Toolbox, the show sponsored by Tero International that features the book Row and I co-authored. And every week we look at a tool for working more effectively with others.
Do you remember a couple of years ago, the news was dominated by clown sightings? And it was around October, and people were reporting seeing clowns. They were around schools, they were in the woods, they were all over the place. And a couple of months later, almost every state in the U.S. and foreign countries had reported these clown sightings.
They had, and even in New Zealand, they refused to sell clown costumes for Halloween. A couple of schools in the U.S. and Canada encouraged kids and parents no clown costumes during trick-or-treating, and Target actually pulled clown masks out of their inventory during that time.
And there were also rumors of planned clown attacks on the night before Halloween, and even though the police said, don't worry, no actual threats, they actually did caution parents and children to be careful.
They did, and there were 500 Penn State University students that actually had started a clown hunting riot. Needless to say, there were not a lot of arrests that night, and they didn't find a lot of clowns.
So there was no evidence of clowns actually lurking around the streets. So why was everybody so scared? Well, Vox reported that the panic wasn't actually caused by the clowns, but by the fear of clowns.
Yeah, clowns, they're portrayed happy, foolish characters.
Most of the time.
But they also have that dark side, like Stephen King's It.
Yes.
The clowns in that. Even Stephen King tweeted that people should not be so scared at that time. He said, cut it out.
Yeah, he's like, let it go already. And Charles Dickens once pointed out that we often feel dissonance between a situation and how we feel about the situation. So that might explain why people were so scared of the clown sightings in 2016.
It can, and it can also explain the fears that we experience in our professional lives as well.
And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about identifying, facing, and overcoming our fears in the workplace. And our development challenge is actually going to look at a very common workplace fear and what to do about it.
Yeah, in our social media, we're going to take a look at the fear of conflict. A lot of people fear conflict in the workplace, and four other common workplace fears we're going to take a look at in our second post. And we are so thrilled today for our interview. We have Kelly Kramer, an actor who is also the co-host of Iowa Outdoor, and she's going to be with us. And I think a fear of performing when I need to perform.
Yeah.
And
inhabiting the persona of another person.
Exactly. So we're really excited about that. So stay tuned.
So for those of you following along in the book, Your Invisible Toolbox, you're going to find us discussing chapter 80, which is titled Send in the Clowns. And if you don't have your own copy of the book, scroll down, click the link, and get yours today. So let's get started. Well, we're going to begin by talking about some of the common fears that people have in the workplace. And there was a Forbes article that actually listed some of the common typical ones.
Yeah, there were. And for starters, people can be afraid of their bosses for a couple different reasons. The boss might not want to deal with a lot of personal interaction, and so they would rather the employees be afraid of them to avoid that. Seems odd, but to avoid that interaction. Or they might inflict fear to cover up their own vulnerabilities.
A lot of people are afraid of losing their jobs.
Yes.
Or losing out on a promotion. And that makes sense, because if we lost our job, that'd put any of us in a bit of a financial bind. We also could feel inadequacy if we get passed over for a promotion.
Yeah, but being afraid of losing a job might prevent us from taking the risks and doing the things necessary in order to get recognition and get promoted.
Exactly. And another fear common in the workplace is worrying people may have hidden agendas. And that can lead to trouble trusting colleagues, and trust issues in the workplace leads to unproductive environments.
Yeah, it definitely can. And finally, Forbes points out that employees can be afraid to be themselves. They feel like they have to be what their boss wants them to be or what they need to be for their role, and they aren't authentically themselves.
And there's actually a fascinating study related to this as our workplaces become more diverse. So this is reported by the Center for Hispanic Leadership. They found Hispanic professionals felt that they only contributed 40% of their talent. That's like horrifying, because they didn't feel like they could confidently be themselves at work.
Yeah, so as we've discussed, if you have any of these fears, you may also be experiencing what we call dissonance, and that is viewing your situation as worse than it actually is or objectively is. And it's not to invalidate the fears you might be having, but it's just to say we can overcome them.
Yes, we can overcome them. We're going to look at how to do that. Unfortunately, it'd be easier to overcome a fear at work than to overcome the fear of clowns.
Yes. So how can we overcome our fears? Well, we're going to take a look at our invisible tool of the week, and that is to identify your fears, and it's on page 190 in our book.
So the first step to overcoming your fears, as you have identified here, is to figure out what they are. Identify your fears and ask yourself which situation caused you to have that stress or anxiety.
And it might be some of the things we've already mentioned from the Forbes article, or it could be some specific interpersonal thing you have going on at work.
Yeah, so let's run through a few others. Sometimes when we move from peer to manager, that
Yeah,
can
that's a
cause
big
a lot of fear. And are people going to take me seriously in our new role? Or what if I'm leading a change and I'm not on board with the change? That can be fearful.
People can be afraid of giving an important presentation, maybe feeling that their presentation skills aren't up to par, or afraid of going to a networking event because they're not really comfortable with making conversation and doing the small talk.
That's so common,
Yeah, it
isn't
is
it?
common.
Well, whatever it is, identifying what your feelings are that lead to that sense of dissonance or anxiety, and often we have to go a few layers deep on this. So ask yourself what specifically is making you feel that way. For instance, you may be afraid of not doing a good enough job, but if you take it a little deeper, you might be afraid that of your supervisor. So we have to go more than just one level deep.
We do. Being specific about what you're afraid of helps you actually clarify what your actual fears are. And if you take a little work to break down those feelings, it's the best way to begin to overcome the fear.
Yeah, and after you do that, Psychology Today recommends that we try to use some self-compassion with ourselves. So instead of turning your fears and beating yourself up and being negative about it, just assure yourself this is completely normal. Every one of us has situations we're uncomfortable with.
We definitely do. And we face the fears, and facing our fears is realizing that fear is just another emotion. I always like to think of it as false evidence appearing real. You don't really know that it's real. And if something is making you afraid, just use that self-compassion and identify it and work through it.
Exactly. Well, for today's development challenge, we're going to talk about a specific fear that you may have, and that's meeting new people. A lot of people have this fear. If you read our monthly e-zine, you'll know we dedicated an entire issue to this a couple of months ago, to the subject of networking.
Yeah, networking is something so many people dread. We hear that in our
Oh, we
etiquette
hear it all
classes.
the time.
They just dread it. And they feel that their conversation skills aren't going to be good enough, and they are uncomfortable meeting new people.
Exactly. So if you're afraid of putting yourself out there at a networking event, don't despair. This is completely normal. Actually, most people feel that way. And it's just like any other fear. It's just an emotion. It doesn't have to hold you back from making those important connections.
Yeah, and if you're afraid of the conversation, you can just start with a simple introduction. That's an easy way to get started in any conversation.
Exactly. And the formula on it is not tough. Go up to somebody and say, "Hello, my name is."
Yes. And you can also help anybody get out of their shells by just introducing others. So find two people that you can introduce, and that helps people network as well.
Exactly.
So there you have it. Let's take a look at our social media posts.
It is time to preview our social media posts of the week, and those of you that follow us on social media know we post useful links and content several times every day. We're going to feature two of those posts right now.
Yeah, and the first one is from LinkedIn, and it addresses a fear that a lot of us have, and that's the fear of conflict. Many of us want to avoid that. The article's by David Leahy, and he describes why people avoid conflict, how this avoidance can actually negatively impact communication in the workplace, and how we can remedy it. And even if you're don't have a fear of conflict, the tips he gives will help you overcome other fears that you might have. And this is going to be on all Tero social media platforms on Monday.
And our second featured post is to that Forbes article we've referenced. It's going to go through 4 common workplace fears, how to overcome them. Chances are excellent you have at least one of those. So we encourage you to read that. That'll be on all Tero social media platforms on Wednesday. And now we're excited to come to the portion of the program we call Ask the Expert, and we're going to welcome to our table Kelly Kramer. Kelly is an actor at the Des Moines Playhouse and other local theater venues, winning the 2015 Iowa Cloris Award. And she's named after Cloris Leachman, who was from Des Moines, for outstanding performance as Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire. This is a very impressive resume. Most recently, she played the lead in Mamma Mia at the Playhouse, and she hosts the IPTV show Iowa Outdoors. We are so fortunate to have you with us here, Kelly. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having
So
me.
nice to have you here. Before we get started on some questions, can you give our viewers a little more about your background?
Sure. Well, I have been acting everything from community theater to professional performances on stage, doing plays, musicals, comedies, dramas, doing voiceover work, commercials, that sort of thing, singing with groups and bands, and anytime I can help tell a story
Putting yourself
in any
out
way,
there.
I like to get involved. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. As an actor and a performer, what's the biggest fear that you have had in doing your work?
Oh, well, I mean, I think a lot of them boil down, not just for me, but for a lot of actors, with feeling vulnerable in situations. You know, you're kind of putting a lot of yourself out there, even though you're often pretending to be someone else. You're kind of opening yourself up, and so when you do that, you're afraid that people are judging you, they're going to think bad things about what you're doing, maybe you're not doing a good job, and so it just all kind of stems from that vulnerability.
Oh, yeah. We talked a lot about identifying fears. So how did you identify fears that you've had?
Well, I think you spend a lot of time kind of in those moments thinking through how are you feeling and what's really at it. You know, you talked about kind of digging through. It may on the surface seem like you're afraid of X, but if you really dig into it, you realize there are other layers contributing to that. And so, you know, it's maybe different in each situation, but something that I've really noticed over the years is that physiological feeling of being afraid is really similar, at least for me, to that physiological feeling of being excited. And so
interesting.
that's kind of helped me reframe fear in my mind as I work, that sometimes that is guiding you towards a more interesting path if you can work through that fear.
Wow, that's
It
true.
is. It's a neat association, isn't
Yes.
it? You know, you have had such a career. I mean, we've heard of all of the things that you have done. So is there anything that you still do today that you find you're fearful about? You've been on the stage so much. I mean, is it a common thing that it's often, or is it...
That's probably a myth that you get
Yeah.
comfortable with that, isn't it?
Right. I mean, I think that's true, and most of the other actors I work with, everyone has those moments, no matter how long you've been doing this. There's still, every time I do a show, whether it's opening night or the third or fourth week of performances, where before you step out onto the stage the first time that night, you think, can I still go outside and then just leave? But you have that moment, and I think you just, over the years, get better at identifying it, understanding it, and then kind of working around it or with it, so that even though you're still feeling it, you're more confident in how you're managing it.
Yeah. We talked a lot about self-compassion. So how has that worked for you? Or have you tried to employ that?
Yes,
We're probably all a work in progress on that.
Well, exactly. I think everyone is. But that feeling of trying to talk yourself through it and understand that everyone around you has something that they are afraid of, even if it's not the same thing that you are, that everyone's kind of working through their fears all of the time. And so if you can be kind with those people and their fears, you can be kind with yourself and your fears.
I imagine you've been helpful to new actors in terms of if they were to have their initial fears and something they're doing. Have you ever mentored someone that way?
Yeah. I think working with younger actors all of the time, you find that they're reflecting back all of those things you've been through, and then you can kind of try to do a little leading, guiding, and reminding them that everyone they're on stage with, no matter how senior they may be, is experiencing to some degree the same sort of thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when we see someone who's an expert performer as you are, it doesn't look like you're afraid of anything when you're up there,
gosh.
you know? You just really don't see that. Well, it works. It definitely works. Any other closing remarks, Ro?
I'm just so fascinating. What's in front of you? What are you looking forward to doing?
Well, I just finished up Mamma Mia, so I'm still trying to get the ABBA out of my head a little bit. We have season 9 of Iowa Outdoors. We'll start shooting that in the spring, so we'll get to show more people the beautiful world of Iowa. And there are a couple of plays and musicals coming up, but we'll see how those shake out.
That's pretty exciting. You know, one of the greatest fears that we hear people, because we do presentation skills training around here, and it's people getting up in front of a group. Has that ever been a fear of yours? Or?
Were you born to do this?
Well, I think there's a little bit of that, but I mean, I'm still always afraid whenever I'm speaking in front of groups, whether it's, you know, in my day job, which is a little more boring than the acting portion, or getting up as an actor, and you just kind of figure out how to push through it, pretend that you're not scared, and find your way to manage
earlier,
it.
you said one of the fears is you're worried about maybe being judged. You actually are. You get critical analysis in the media. How do you deal with that?
Yes. Well, you kind of have to learn to just shake those critics off a little bit, and focus on the things that you feel went well. I mean, if I feel confident about something, then it doesn't matter what someone else is saying about it. So some of it is getting to know what you're putting out there and what you feel good about in your own work.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, great words. Thank you so much for
Yes,
joining
thank you
us.
so much for being here. We've
Yes.
actually got probably another 30 seconds. Do you have any advice for our viewers? So these are business folks that are
Sure.
watching this, and all of them wrestle with the same fears. We love that we're hitting on it's a common thing we all experience.
Sure.
What advice would you have for someone?
I think, at least in my work, and I think this can apply in the business world too, that like I was saying, that closeness between fear and excitement, I found if I avoid the feelings of fear, I'm comfortable and I'm boring and I'm not pushing through to something new. So if you can find a way to realistically manage those fears and make sure you're assessing your situation appropriately,
Yes.
you can push yourself to kind of grow and reach some new level that you haven't reached before.
That's such a tremendous insight, because I think you're right. The physiological response between fear and excitement probably is pretty close if we can manage to trick ourselves into thinking it's one or the other. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to all of you for watching. If you missed any portion of the program, or if you want to share it with others, you'll find the entire show on Tero's YouTube channel. Join us again next Monday morning at 9:03 Central Time, where we will explore another tool in your Invisible Toolbox.
And now it's your turn. We welcome your ideas and suggestions for future shows. Email your ideas to ideas@yourinvisibletooolbox.com. And we'd like to thank today Rachel Trainham, our camera person, Kyle Plummer, our director, and Kelly for being our guest.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. And that's a wrap.